All right, now the next thing that I want to do is start to think about why critical thinking, critical reasoning matters. Why should we care about it in the first place? So that's going to be our guiding question for right now. Why should I care about critical thinking or reasoning? Right? You might be saying to yourself, hey, all that stuff about logos and the notion of a human being a rational animal, all that's cool and it's interesting, but why should I care about it? How is it going to apply to my life in any great detail at all? So our author, Vaughn, in our textbook, he gives us several different things to say about this, different answers, different ways in which it matters. So on the one hand, Vaughn tells us that critical thinking gives us very specific skills for learning and exploring. Right? So what does he mean by that? Well, on the one hand, we can apply what we learn, the skills that we learn, to basically every single part of our life. No matter what field you go into, whether you're going into engineering, to mathematics, to health sciences, to business, you're going to need to have these skills of the ability to make judgments and evaluations, to be able to analyze different statements and claims, to think about the probability of different things. Right? These are skills that can apply no matter what you do in your life. And I'm going to say a little bit more next week, but I think this is explicitly important in the age of AI. Right? So this is going to matter quite a bit for AI because artificial intelligence allows us to do many of the things that we typically do no matter what's going on. It allows us to do many of the things in our daily get-go of life without thinking, right? So it's a way of bypassing the process of thinking itself, right? So you might think that's a kind of a problem that we should pay attention to. I'm going to hold off on that for now, but generally speaking, the idea here is that it gives us sort of like the common language that we can use in any aspect of our life. Even when you're having a conversation with your significant other, or when you're, talking to your children, right? These are skills that you'll have as an adult, and these are important skills to have, right? Now, another answer that Vaughn gives us is that critical thinking works as a kind of defense. It's a kind of defense mechanism against errors. Or you might say against different sort of prejudices. Or against the potential for manipulation. All right, so let me say a little bit more about that. All of us are fallible human beings. We make errors all the time. Sometimes I like to tell my students that I'm a walking fallacy because, I recognize that I commit fallacies. I try not to. I try to become aware of it when I do. I'm also biased in a lot of ways, right? So these cognitive biases influence the way I think. Now, I shouldn't let that influence the way I think. I should become aware of these biases if I can in order to, correct for those errors. But nonetheless, this is true for all of us. We need to begin with the fact that we are not perfect, that we make mistakes in our thinking all the time. Right? So critical thinking gives us a kind of mechanism or a skill that allows us to defend against those errors or to correct those errors. Right? So just think about the biases that you might have. One bias that we're going to pay attention to happens unconsciously when you hear the same thing repeated over and over and over and over again. This is the reason why political ads literally repeat the same thing constantly all the time. Most of the time what it's saying is false, right? Or it's not a very accurate analysis or description of what's going on. Right? So once you start hearing the same thing over and over and over and over again, you unconsciously just start accepting it as true. right? That's a kind of a bias or a kind of prejudice that we should be paying attention to, right? We should correct for that if we can. Manipulation happens all the time in commercial advertising, right? A commercial is going to do whatever it can to get you to buy its product, or at least to get you to remember its product, which makes it more likely that you will buy it in the future. And this is a way of manipulating you. And if you want to, have some sort of a skill or a mechanism that allows you to recognize when you're being manipulated and make the right choice with your purchasing power, then that's one reason why critical thinking would be beneficial for you. Right now, another answer that Vaughn gives us for the question of why should I care about critical thinking is because it helps us discover who we are, right? It's a kind of self-discovery. What do we mean by this? When we are talking about self-discovery or trying to really figure out who you are as a person, as an individual, what we're looking at is an understanding of different things, right? So when we understand something, we're able to see that thing from all kinds of different points of view. So when you lack understanding, you may have some belief about that thing, but when you're unable to see that particular issue from other points of view, then you don't have a full understanding of that issue, right? So let's say that you believe that God exists. Right? A lot of people believe that God exists. That's a pretty common belief. So if you have that belief, but you've never really looked at the different reasons and arguments that might be offered both for this belief and also against that belief, well, then you probably don't really understand the belief. You do have it, right? It's true to say you believe that God exists, but it's not really true to say you understand why you believe it, right? So in order to say, I really understand this now, you've got to be able to go beyond the reasons why you believe it and try to understand why people would reject that belief. And that's a kind of discovering of yourself. And this is true both for these really big and important questions and things in our life, like whether or not God exists. It's also true for very mundane and ordinary things, right? So you might say, look, I believe that the Kansas City Royals will win the World Series, right? Now, I might believe that, but if I haven't really paid attention to why I believe it, or to some reasons why that might be false, then I don't really understand that belief. I just simply sort of assert it without really knowing why. So again, once I start looking at the reasons why I might believe this, and looking at the sort of reasons why somebody might reject that belief, that's a process of becoming familiar with yourself. It's a sort of metacognitive act, reflecting on your own thoughts, reflecting on your own mental processes. And in the process of doing that, you're discovering who you are as an individual, right? So this kind of critical thinking is a form of self-discovery, right? It gives us reasons for what we believe. It gives us a way to see things in a new perspective, considering the objections both for and against different views that we might hold. Now, a fourth answer that Vaughn gives us for why critical thinking matters is because of what we might call our contemporary kind of post-truth society. Especially with regard to social media and AI, right? Both the way in which social media impacts our lives in the last, at least the last 10 to 15 years, and certainly the way AI is going to continue to impact society and the way you live your lives in the coming years, right? All of that is extremely important as it relates to what we're calling post-truth, right? So there's lots of different ways that we can understand what we mean here. And what we mean is not the claim that there is no truth or that truth is relative in any kind of way. Rather, this is a kind of derogatory term that's being, it's pejoratively being used to refer to people who are not concerned with facts, not concerned with reality, not concerned with data. I'm going to say a lot more about this, especially as it relates to AI, in the module that we'll look at next week. Again, I want to kind of hold off on that for now. But the basic idea, though, is that we need these skills in order to kind of have another sort of a defense mechanism in response to, this post-truth society that we live in. So we'll look at that specific one in more detail next time.